Hi everyone, my name is Kathera Green and I am part of the Skoll Foundation team. I'm excited to welcome you to the Skoll World Forum session on telling the story of the future. This year, the forum's theme is closing the distance. So we thought there was no better way to reflect that theme than to invite our global network to design and build a new kind of event together. So I want to share just a few quick logistical items before we begin. First, this session is being recorded and will be released publicly after the event. Feel free to use the chat on the right, as some of you are already doing, to engage with each other, to ask questions of the speakers and share resources. This session is scheduled for an hour. And at the end of the session, please take a few seconds to share your feedback via the polls section. Your thoughts are really important to share with us. And on social media, we're using the hashtag SkollWF, and would love for you to do the same. So we are so thrilled to be able to include this session in this year's virtual Skoll World Forum. I want to extend a special thank you to Radio Ambulante Studios for proposing and designing it. I'm a big fan of their podcast, and so I'm especially grateful that they're part of this year's event. So with that, I'd like to introduce Daniel Alarcon, and he'll be moderating this session. So over to you.
Thank you, Kathara. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to host this conversation. It is, for me, I think something that I've been thinking about a lot in this past year, and I'm thrilled to have Courtney, Rita, and Latif here to engage with this idea and with this topic, which I think sort of transcends storytelling and journalism, and it's just almost like a bigger sort of spiritual concern, which is how we deal with the future, how we tell ourselves stories that don't drown us in despair and maybe push us towards action. So with that, I want to introduce our panel, and I couldn't be more excited to be speaking with these brilliant folks. So first we have Courtney Desiree Morris. Hi, Courtney. Courtney is a visual and conceptual artist and assistant professor of gender and women's studies at the University of California, Berkeley. She teaches courses on critical race theory, feminist theory, Black social movements in the Americas, women's social movements in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as race and environmental politics in the African diaspora. As an artist, her work examines the complexities of place, ecology, memory, and the constant search for home. Morris works primarily in the fields of photography, experimental video, installation, and performance art, playing with her own family's history and performatively inhabiting the stories of her childhood and imaginatively filling in the gaps where the facts are either unknown or in dispute. So welcome, Courtney.
Thank you.
Latif Nasser is the co-host of the award-winning WNYC Studios show Radio Lab, where he's reported stories on everything from snowflake photography to medieval robots to polar bears who like to have sex with grizzly bears. Last year, his miniseries, The Other Latif, was released, and it's about his Moroccan namesake, who happens to be detainee number 244 at Guantanamo Bay. In addition to his work in audio, Latif is now the host and executive producer of a Netflix science documentary series called Connected. He also has a PhD from Harvard in the history of science. And Rita Indiana. Oh, hi, Latif. How are you? Sorry.
Hi. Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Rita Indiana is a musician and novelist whose groundbreaking genre-bending work tackles issues of climate change, colonialism, and racism. Born and raised in the Dominican Republic and now living in Puerto Rico, Rita is a driving force in contemporary Caribbean literature and music. She's the author of 3 collections of stories and 5 novels, 3 of which had been translated into English. Her novel Papi was made into a film and released last year or this year?
Last year.
Along with her brilliant, what's that?
Oddly, last year.
Right. Along with her brilliant and propulsive gothic merengue and mucho más album, Mending the Times, which I recommend everyone listen to. So welcome, Rita.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start just, I feel like we can't talk about the future without talking about this year and change that we've all been living through with the pandemic. And I wanted to begin just throwing a general question at all of you. How the pandemic year has affected your work. And actually, just before that, I'm gonna sort of ask each of you to talk a bit about your practice so that everyone can get to know you. And Courtney, why don't we start with you? And I'm gonna share my screen now so that everyone can see Solastalgia, and you can sort of just talk through it. So while I do that, maybe you just want to tell us a little bit about who you are, and then sort of segue into that question.
Sure. Thanks again so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to be in conversation with Rita and Latif. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my background is, I should probably, in the interest of transparency, say that I'm something of an accidental artist. I got a PhD in anthropology. I spent most of my 20s and 30s doing research on Black women's social movements against state violence in Central America, working specifically in Nicaragua on the Caribbean coast there, and studying Black women's social movements in the post-revolutionary period. And so, I was much more interested in going and studying Black communities outside of the United States. My father's from the Caribbean, he's Jamaican, and I really wanted to get away from home, which for me was growing up in the US South. My mother is from a small town in Louisiana called Mossville, which is a historic freedmen's community. It was founded by formerly enslaved Black folks who were living there after the end of the Civil War. And, I spent a lot of my childhood traveling to Louisiana, going to this small town and thinking that there was really nothing important or special about that place. And I could not have been more wrong. And it wasn't until after I completed my PhD in 2012 and I was working in Houston and teaching at Rice University. And I started to really look at Mossville with a different set of eyes. And part of what prompted that shift was that the town at that time was the site, it has been the site for the last 80 years of a number of petrochemical facilities that produce all kinds of toxic products that we all use in our daily lives. And in 2012, when Bobby Jindal was governor of the state of Louisiana, he brokered an agreement with a multinational South African petrochemical company named Sasol. And Sasol decided that they wanted to build an ethane cracker facility there, and to also build a facility that would allow them to develop synthetic petroleum derived from natural gas, which is as toxic as it sounds. And in order to do this, they needed to expand their facilities further into the community than they had ever been before, requiring a full buyout of the town. So they essentially bought out the homes of many of the people who lived in the community, resulting in overwhelming displacement of Mossville residents. So I started to go to Mossville, and I was so heartbroken by what was happening and realizing the buyout meant that the community was effectively going to die. And that really led me to pick up a camera and to start documenting what was happening there. And, so I would walk through the community, photographing empty streets, the foundations of houses that had formerly been there that were no longer present, documenting, the few buildings that remain, including a historic church, historic cemeteries where many of my ancestors are buried. And then I began to use my own body and to sort of act as a kind of a vessel for ancestral memory, to move through, so that the lives and stories of people who had lived in the community could be represented in a way that wasn't possible if, for an outsider. So for someone coming from outside of the community, looking at Mossville, all you would see is a bunch of empty streets and foundations. You wouldn't know that there had been a vibrant community that had lived there. You wouldn't know that there were indigenous communities that had lived there before the beginning of settler colonialism, before white people took over that area, before the petroleum industry took over that area. And I wanted to try to find a way to tell those stories. And so I began to use my own body to tell those stories. And all of that evolved into a project that is entitled Solastalgia. And I wish I could claim credit for that term, but I didn't come up with it. It's a term that was developed by an Australian environmental philosopher named Glenn Albrecht. And he defines solastalgia as the kind of deep existential grief that people experience when they lose their home as a result of forces beyond their control, specifically forces related to the destruction of climate and natural environments. And so that was, that the kind of heartbreak that I experienced watching Mossville die felt really akin to what Albrecht was describing in his work. And I wanted to, figure out a way to talk about what that experience felt like. And to really also talk about the way that art allowed me to process and to deal with that grief and to tell those stories that needed telling. So I'll stop there for now. I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A. And I'm really curious to, I'm really excited to hear what others have to share about their work as well.
Oh, absolutely. I have like several questions, but we'll come back to all that, Courtney. Thank you. Rita, I wanted to share as we sort of talk about your work a bit from a video you made for Mandinga Times called After School, and specifically this. It's got the first verse of the title track from your album, but it begins with the storm with Hurricane Maria, and I want to share this because I think I'm going to play it, and then we can sort of talk about why you chose to begin there.
Ya los panitos de Nostradamus lo dijeron, que lo que viene más bien fuerte para tu cuero. Revoluciones, parece que papá Dios cogió vacaciones. No hay capicúa para te domino, con la trompeta de otro jerico. Estos caballos no caben en jeringa, recoge que llegan los tiempos de Mandinga. TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. TikTok, 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 TikTok.
No te dejes, no te dejes, no te dejes. Aprendí a vivir y a sobrevivir. Aprendí a vivir, no te dejes.
Something,
Well,
right?
yeah, that piece was conceptualized and directed by Noria Quintero. So she chose to use the Hurricane Maria footage because it turned Puerto Rico into the ground zero of climate change. I think it was a turning point for the Caribbean, and we're now scared that ashes from the volcano in San Vicente is gonna show up in Puerto Rico now. It has been pretty much crazy, a science fiction movie in itself, the lives of the people that live here in Puerto Rico since 2017. So it was basically Mandinga Times, which means it's like you called it, a songbook for the end of the world. This could be like the seed, for what the album was going to be, the hurricane and what it entailed for the Caribbean, and especially for the people of Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
About my work, I'm a Caribbean storyteller, and I reassemble the stories of people from the crossing, like Kobe Preciado calls them, instead of marginalized people, the people from the crossing, such as immigrants, housemaids, transgender sex workers, midwives, skateboarders, addicts, and war veterans. My work looks at the Hispanic Caribbean lower middle class characters and their ideas about gender, race, and class, and how these ideas came to be, and how we reshape our notions of the past through storytelling. And what happens to us when we retell these stories, when we reshape the way we tell ourselves these stories. I'm currently working on a weird novel about the friendship between a Vietnam veteran from Puerto Rico and a queer Dominican woman who works for him, like takes care of him, the caretaker. and how certain past events intervene the present and the future constantly, and how the past changes, basically. It's something that is I'm interested in very much right now. I fashioned myself into some sort of time traveler in the last couple of years through my work. I come from a country, the Dominican Republic, with one of the America's worst education systems, if not the worst. And this means most young people are not allowed to imagine a future or make plans for it. So there's an interest, because I think thinking about time and social justice is something that we need to do to make things better or happen for a lot of people in countries like mine.
Great. Thank you, Rita. Latif, you've recently branched out from the radio and stepped into the world of film and documentary, and I find this an interesting change. I want to play the trailer from Connected, and I want you to talk a little bit about your transition into this new
Sure.
Medium.
Hearing the audio.
So I think I forgot to share audio. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Everyone just watched that. Is that what just happened? Well, that obviously was what's going to happen, and I apologize for that. Yeah.
It's you know what? As someone who comes from radio, I can say the sound doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
You know,
The sound doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to play it again. I see that in the chat. I'm not going to play it again because it will take up too much time. But I'm going to put the link in there, and my apologies for everybody. Trust me, it was super charming. It's much better with the audio, and you should all watch it. Even though it's very polished looking, it's even more polished sounding. So Latif, talk to me about that transition. And again, my apologies.
No, not at all. No, so basically, my story is with respect to this is so I've been a long time sort of science journalist, science reporter on the public radio show and podcast Radiolab, and then I got approached by this production company 0.0 to do a science TV show or to pitch a science TV show with them, and we went around and around with a bunch of different ideas, and we got rejected so many times by so many places for so many ideas. But this one actually was one that I and we and the team that made it, like, we really fell in love with, and one of the kind of the germs of it. So this was like, and it's so weird to try to put your head back there, but it was pre-pandemic, and this idea, it like felt so like the argument, the thesis of the show is that like we're all connected, right? And it felt so like, and we're connected in these surprising ways that you can sort of scarcely imagine. and that felt so kind of like novel and fresh in a way somehow before the pandemic, which now, I don't know, maybe it feels like a very like a obvious and maybe almost like scary thing to a lot of people. But anyway, I think it really was an idea that was born out of a bunch of different things, but among them, one of the things that I was really thinking about and that we quoted in our first production meeting was this, this quote from Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, which is like, we are all, what is the line? It's so good. It's like, we are all woven, we are all trapped in a inescapable network of mutuality. We're woven in a garment of destiny or something like that. I'm butchering the line, but it's this beautiful idea. And it felt so, especially during sort of the Trump administration, where we were putting up walls and we were, it just felt like this idea that sort of cut across so many, sort of scientifically, it was something that I had noticed, over 10 years of science reporting, something I'd noticed again and again and again and again. But then also it felt like it had almost this both a spiritual angle, an ethical, moral kind of angle. It had this, it sort of hit on a lot of levels. And I really dug that. And so like Radiolab, is a show I've been with a long time, but it wasn't a show I started. This was a show I started, and I kind of I wanted to lead with that sort of thesis, that idea, that feeling, because it felt like that was a sort of just the most basic idea that somehow, needed to be said out loud. And hopefully, the show is sort of fun, but it's in a way an argument, sort of, in terms of the stories, in terms of the structure, in terms of the kind of sort of everything about it was like trying to make that argument.
Tommy Dierke's put in the chat the quote. I'm going to read it because I think it's great. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. It's interesting that you say, Latif, and I want to use that to segue to my first question. That after the pandemic, we can read that idea of connectivity in a negative way, because it strikes me that one of the things that's great about the show, one of the things that it is so, I find the idea of connectivity very, very optimistic. And I wonder for all of you, how this pandemic year, when that connectivity has been shut off for public health reasons, how that has sort of changed the way you approach your work and the way you see your work in the context of this kind of era defining global challenge that we've been facing with COVID-19. And maybe I'll throw that question first, just start at the beginning, throw that question to Courtney. Sorry.
Okay, okay, great. I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's been a really, I think, a sobering year for all of us. I was looking this morning as I was thinking about just how the pandemic has affected all of us, and realizing how many people have died this year. Almost 3 million people globally have died from COVID-19, which is a really kind of sobering reality when you think about it. And, for me, a lot of my work is really rooted in a kind of an ethos of ancestral veneration. Like, I think about the dead a lot in my work, and about what it means to try to tap into these archives of ancestral memory that really kind of hold a lot of information about how you survive the end of the world, right? If you look at the experiences of people of African descent in the West, we've experienced the end of the world like indigenous peoples many, many times over, and somehow lived to tell the tale and to pass that stuff on through DNA, right, to our descendants so that we can survive. And so this year I found myself thinking a lot about, as I was making work, I found myself thinking a lot about what am I passing on? And that question really took on a very material, practical, tenor, because I was also pregnant. I had a baby in October, and so I found myself thinking oh, how am I going to teach this little Black person to survive in the world, in a world that is, rooted in white supremacy, that's rooted in kind of the violence of capital expansion, that's rooted in heterosexism. How do I teach this person to survive as all of themselves, in this world? And so that for me has really been kind of the challenge of my work, is like trying to make work that can, you know, that can act as something like a blueprint for survival for the future. Like that maybe somebody might look at this one day and see something useful, you know, that can help them navigate the realities of the challenges of their historical moment. So I find myself thinking a lot about that these days.
Yeah. That's great. Rita, I wanted to ask you, because so you said at the top that you've been working on a novel. You came out with an album. In a normal world, you would have been on tour, filling up arenas, or concert halls all over the Caribbean and Europe and the United States. Now, and so much of your character Mandinga is a character that will be created sort of in synergy with an audience, with people dancing, with the energy of a crowd. And I was wondering if you had tilted towards writing this new weird novel, as you described it, in part because there is no way to access that co-creation of being with an audience.
Yeah, it was hard last year because after 10 years, I decided to make another record, and you know, we had a tour planned and everything just, everything got canceled. And this year, things are getting canceled again. So I started teaching creative writing workshops, and actually understanding teaching as a form of art, as a multimedia performance, as a weird bizarre television project. And I've been thinking a lot about mental health in poor countries like mine and like Puerto Rico, because I mean, access to coverage and access to mental health, because in our countries, there's not a culture of talking about these things, and especially in the middle class. And I think it's a problem of all the classes, but I've thought about it because I've been struggling with it. I struggled with it the whole last year, and I've seen my friends struggle with it, and I've seen how, I mean, there's like almost a public health problem in the streets of Puerto Rico, of people that have lost everything last year, and especially in the middle of a health crisis, you know, where you have to take care of yourself, and there's so many people that are in the streets right now, and don't have anyone to take care of them, don't have a place to go and, you know, have a health services to deal with their medication. It's a big problem, and it's something that I started working with about the novel of the war veteran because of these issues. And there's a lot of stuff that has come up from not going to play the gigs, you know, and I think it has been a good thing in a way. You know, it made me go back to literature, and I think it has made me a better human being also, you know, and thinking about other stuff that is more important than playing and having a good time. And I think the album, it was ¿cómo se dice? Una profecía que tenía que cumplirse. I don't know how to say that in English.
A prophecy that had to be fulfilled. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an album about the end of the world, and of course it was going to come out and you know,
your fault. This whole thing was your fault.
For it. And also another thing that I've been thinking a lot the last 6 months is about the importance of education. Again, what I was talking about before, biology and history education in elementary schools in the Caribbean, so that we can survive. Like, just there has to be an education revolution in this area, which is, like I said before, zero for climate change. And without a revolution in these areas, there's no way my kids or Brittany's or, you know, will have a planet to live in. So I'm thinking about these things and seeing how I can how I can poner un granito de arena, you know, how I can do something.
Right. Latif, in your case, like all of the things that we've been watching that were filmed in 2019, they feel like, you know, you get nostalgia for something that you've never seen before, and to watch you sort of traipse around the world and give and, you know, meet people unmasked in all these kind of wild places. It is a joyful experience to watch. It also is like filled with longing, like, ooh, I want to travel, I want to see that. what has it been like? How has this year changed your approach to your work?
I think, not unlike Courtney, my partner and I, we had a pandemic baby as well. So a lot of the, not all, but a lot of the issues that you were raising, like it really made them extra sharp and feel like you're, even like going into a hospital to have a kid when, my wife is like masked while she's, breathing. It's like a very extreme kind of experience. But for me, I think actually like so many of the stories I do, and even on the show, like for all the highfalutin, quoting Martin Luther King and stuff, like they're kind of silly stories. Like I do like stories about poop and stories about I like doing sort of silly stuff. But the pandemic was like kind of like as a science journalist, you sort of I don't know. There was a lot of kind of despair for me. Like I was like, and not to, I mean, obviously world's smallest violin, but for me, the thing was like, it was like covering this topic. All of a sudden it was like the only subject was COVID. Like we at Radiolab, we declared we called it like an editorial state of emergency, where it was like, everybody's covering COVID. Like no matter what you're doing, cover COVID. And I tried to do that. And I really struggled. I'm not great at like sort of covering like breaking news and trying to do the thing that, that like scrutinizing a sort of granted, it's not one story, it's like a million stories, but still it was tricky to kind of find interesting angles. And I kept sort of and then I felt very guilty for wanting to do any other kind of story, but like, I don't know, it was a weird thing where I felt drawn to other sorts of stories, because I think there are really other interesting and important things that need to be covered and people need to be paying attention to. And a lot of those journalists who would have been paying attention to that stuff were now paying attention to COVID. But there was a long stretch where I was sort of, it was kind of, it felt so paralyzing, because I don't know, there was, it was just the same story over and over. And it was a story of that, like, it was a story that felt so, kind of despairing. And then it was like despairing and covering the despair. And how do I get out of that? And at some point, like, I mean, I did come back to, I did do some COVID coverage, and I did do some other kind of reporting as well, about, a lot of the, like, I think like knock-on crises that we've had from that. But I've also tried to keep kind of covering other stuff, because I do think that like people need more. People need to kind of think about other things, and they need an escape, and they need it's like this year is so much, and especially because so many people are at home sick, or so many people are with kids who they, who are at home, who they need to keep busy and are at their wits end, like there's just so many people who need so many different kinds of things. And for me, it was like that realization and the ability to be like, okay, well, what kind of work can I bring here that is adding, that is sort of still in the mission of making us all feel connected and feel like we're all, pulling together. But at the same time, like maybe I'm not covering exactly COVID stories, and that's okay.
Yeah, it does feel like the what looms over all the stories we tell is climate change, and in some ways the global response to the pandemic and the disjointed nature of that response doesn't bode well for a globally coordinated response against this next crisis, which is not even the next, it's like the current crisis. And you've all dealt with climate change in different ways in your work, both obliquely and quite directly. And so I wanted to ask you all, because it's something that I think about a lot as a parent as well. You mentioned despair, Latif. Like how is it that we tell stories that spur action? How is it that we tell stories that don't sort of sink us into gloom? I think that's a really important, the attraction of despair is also the attraction of passivity. And so I wonder how you have each sort of approached that challenge. I don't know, Latif, you're nodding. Do you want to start, and then we'll go backwards?
Oh man, this is such a hard question. And it's such a hard question because I feel like I've pitched so many stories to Radiolab. I tried to do a bunch of stories on Connected. This is kind of the central difficulty, I think, of covering climate change. It's like, what is the way that you can keep it hopeful, and that you can while still kind of conveying the emergency nature, the all pervasive nature of what's going on. I don't think there's necessarily a kind of magic key that I have to kind of like explain that or unlock it. But I do think that there's like, to me, I started realizing, like, as I was pitching more and more stories about climate change, I was like, oh, I need to think about this more tactically. Like, there are a lot of stories that are out there that are just the stories that are being done because they need to be done, and they're the same story we've heard 100 times. And then that's the thing, that reading those 100 stories makes you feel like you're sort of sliding down into that, into that morass of like I can't do anything. This is all overwhelming. And so for me, I've like been really trying to think about it tactically. Like, it's like, what are the stories actually that I can tell, that will do that thing, that will actually change people's minds, or that aren't just me doing a climate change story so that I can say I did a climate change story and feel fine about myself and go to bed that night and be like, I'm so great. But actually, like, that will go out in the world and really, I don't know, change people's minds, fill them in on a certain corner of what's going on, that whether through their personal behavior, through their mental framing of a certain issue, through their government, through whatever, there's something that actually there's a piece of it that they own, and that is that feels like mutable and changeable, and like that feels something feels doable about it. To me, I think it's like, I don't know, I've tried to get a lot more tactical about that, because climate change, just in general, it's like, to me, it's like, it's as if you design something that is really difficult to cover. It's like it's not necessarily, it's like very hard to make it human scale and immediate. It's like vague and big and like a long, slow burn, although it's now going to be much more, it is and will continue to be much more active and stuff. But anyway, there's a lot of things about it that are challenging in terms of the storytelling. So for me, I don't know, I'm just thinking about a lot tactically, like what's the kind of story that you can actually crack and actually like make a difference, as opposed to just adding onto the pile of, here's another story that's saying the same thing that you've heard 100 times.
Yeah. Courtney, your framing that you spoke about at the beginning of sort of having a historical precedence of people surviving the end of the world seems particularly apt for us now. And it seems like one of your tactics has been, sort of prioritizing the historical memory of a place and of a people, and that almost in the act of telling that story and the act of that in itself is resistant to these bigger issues of climate change and capital in certain ways too. So sort of, if you could talk about that same question, but sort of through that frame of your work of Soul Nostalgia.
Sure. I mean, I do think that is, that for me has really been, I mean, it's part of it's part of my creative practice, but it's also part of a spiritual practice, which is really about, when you engage with historical memory and sort of the traumas and the violence of the past, it has a way of helping you to sort of reorient, like, the way you think about time and how change happens over time, right? And so, teaching in universities, for example, and teaching in like predominantly white institutions, oftentimes I'll stand in front of classrooms and I will tell my students, like, 100 years ago, the idea of someone looking like me teaching this class on like feminist environmental ethics and like what queer theory can teach us about the environment, or like any of that shit, would have seemed completely, it just would not be possible. Like, someone like me was not possible. And yet here I am standing in front of you saying all of these things and doing all of these things with like, my weirdo art hippie anthropology self. And isn't that amazing, right? And so when I frame that statement by them asking the question, like, well, what had to happen historically for someone like me to be here, right? Like, what kinds of radical imagination had to happen for someone like me to exist in the world? you know, and I think about on a very personal and, you know, level, I think about that a lot, like what ancestral prayers had to happen so that someone like me could materialize in the world as I am at this moment to do my work, you know, and, you know, and I'm thinking about being a mother in that way too, you know, that like, that as I'm like bringing a person into the world, like that person has arrived at this moment to do specific kinds of work, right? And what kind of tools can I give them as they make their way into the world to tackle the challenges that they're facing right now? And so, you know, I get that that climate change is a paralyzing sort of social and political issue that people kind of freeze in the face of the scale of it. But I also think that, you know, change is terrifying, you know, but it also presents an opportunity to create systems that are different than what we have right now, you know. And nothing changes because if people were comfortable, nothing would ever change. You know, climate change is presenting us with this possibility of being able to transform these really radically unequal systems that we have been born into and to imagine something else. And so the question that we're asking ourselves is, it's not about like looking for some technological solution that's going to solve all of our problems. It's about really asking ourselves, do we have the ability to imagine something different? And I think that's really what we run into is our lack of imagination.
Right. That's beautiful and apt. I think Rita, your work is all about that imagination, and you've been both in your music and in your literature doing you know, making connections between the past and the present across musical styles. You know, you have a novel that takes place simultaneously in the, you know, buccaneer piracy era of the Dominican Republic and in the future post you know, environmental apocalypse in the Caribbean, and I think about that. How is it that this strand of environmentalism sort of came up through your work, and how have you found ways to tell it with? I think the thing that I'm always surprised about your work is how funny it is, even when it's dealing with these very heavy, you know, concerns.
Yeah, listening to Latif and Kearney, I was thinking about the strategy of humor, you know, like for my survival as a human being and my family and dealing with teenage kids that are, you know, inside a house, have been inside this apartment for a year, and how to, I think I'm writing now a work that is halfway horror and comedy. I think I'm a tentacle is a little bit of that too. And as a strategy, you know, to open eyes through horror and, you know, make people feel a little better through humor, you know, like how do you take a little bit of each thing and make it work. I'm working with the thing about climate change that spoke to me is the landscape, my landscape, you know, the beaches, the corals, the bleached corals. When I go to the beaches where I went as a kid and all I see is white corals everywhere, you know, the city of San Juan that is becoming ruins, like the city's, I mean, 200,000 people left after Maria have left the island. Just how the landscape is changing so fast, you know, the deterioro of the city, you know, how the city, it's like ruins, erosion in the beaches. It's just something that is very present and very real. It's not fiction, it's not speculative fiction. It's my reality. And like Kearney was saying, you know, I was born in a region where our genealogy as a culture is the disaster. You know, it's slavery, it's genocide, it's colonialism. You know, this is something that is part of who we are. And Junot Diaz speaks about radical hope, and I think that is it's a very powerful idea. You know, the idea that in the midst of the apocalypse, you can come up with something to survive, even if it's, you know, dancing, music, poetry, and humor.
Right.
Oh no, I both of those responses, I really love them, and in a way, because you were at the beginning of this question, you were saying that sort of the disjointed and that kind of like our COVID response, and even like, for instance, the way the vaccines are being distributed or something now, you know, it's like it's not looking good for us. But in a way, also, I do think seeing climate change as, and I think was beautifully put, like it's almost like seeing it as a beginning instead of just an end. And I think that that's really, really powerful. And also, it's also true for COVID as well. Like in the way that now, work, childcare, like all of these different across so many different structures in our society are being like remade. And I think that is awesome. It is a beginning, and I think that like it's like taking that mindset and then using it on climate change. Like what's the new beginning here? What's the radical, fresh reimagining that we can do? Like I think that's a very powerful way of reframing and of like waking people up to the possibilities.
Yeah. I wanted to ask the three of you. Wait, before I do, I want to mention that if folks in the chat want to leave questions, please do. The three of you have all sort of jumped across genres, across medium, pushed against the limits of the academy. Latif, just have the PhD on your shelf just to look at on occasion. I wanted to ask about that, sort of like what it feels like to feel like, okay, I have a story to tell, but this is not the right way to tell it. I need new tools to tell it. And also sort of what you think is the next medium that you want to explore that you haven't done yet. Courtney, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I'm probably the most institutionalized of all the speakers, so I'm still working in the belly of the beast in the academy. I think, for me, I think part of the challenge is that, on one hand, I think universities, that's where I'm housed, so that's what I'll speak to. They can be really amazing and powerful spaces. Like I've met students there with ideas who just like blow me away and challenge me and like force me to like rethink all of these ideas that I don't even realize how deeply I've internalized them. And so I do think in that sense, universities can be a really amazing place. But I also think that, one of the things that really became very clear to me at the beginning of the pandemic is just how they're not dynamic enough to respond quickly to the pace at which change actually happens in the world. And so, for me, I felt like, okay, it's fine to be conversant in the language of the academy and to be able to do that work and to speak academies and write theoretical work, and all of that has a place. I'm not saying it's not valuable. I value that work. And I also need to be able to create work that is much more adaptive and responsive and can just move a lot more quickly, right? It's like the difference between having a sort of traditional army versus like Cuban style guerrilla warfare, like the focal model of like guerrilla style warfare. Like I just need something that moves faster and is a lot more adept at responding to dynamic change. And art has really been that for me, and so I've been really, it's been really great making visual work, working primarily in the medium of large format photography. Over the course of the pandemic, I've been doing a lot more video work. So I, made a project called Sopera de Yemaya that is really about kind of like engaging with the ocean as a site of knowing and like thinking about what it means to imagine like your body being connected to the ocean as like as a particular kind of like spiritual and ecological landscape. And so for me, video work is really exciting, and I feel like we're in such a visual, like digital age right now that it's really kind of the best format to communicate really complex ideas to a wide audience of people. So that's where my head is at right now. It's all about the video.
Yeah. Rita?
Yeah, well, I started teaching these storytelling workshops the end of last year, and I'm enjoying them a lot. And I think I want to work that way. Like we do a lot of sharing in the workshops. Like we do a lot of exercises and we read them out loud. Everyone reads, everyone shares. And I think I want to work, do a more like collective storytelling project. I've found so many like sides to the pandemic story and to despair, and how so many different perspectives, from Europe, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and I think I want to do something with it, do something with my students and their sides of what has happened to them. to us.
Latif?
First of all, let me just say, I thought it was very funny how you asked that question as if you were not the like most medium fluid person probably of all of us, just like hopping across writing a novel and making a podcast as if it's no big deal. So you should probably answer your own question too.
I will not. Go on. Thank you.
But for me, I think like I do think, I mean, for all the differences between all the, like I've done print and TV and podcast, like to me, there are differences, but they're sort of so much dwarfed by the things that they share in common, which is like, I mean, I think that, you know, there's one person on one side and trying to connect to another person on the other side. And to me, like what my approach has always been, I just sort of fall in love with stories and I'm like, pitch it here, pitch it here, pitch it here. No, it gets rejected. Pitch it here, pitch it here, pitch it here. Like, and find a way to make it work. And then when it fails everywhere, I'm just going to put it on Twitter. And it's just like finding a way to like, to just, I don't know, just like find the stories that you think matter and then just figure out a way to make it. Like it doesn't even matter where or how, or as long as you get it out in front of the world and you can share it and then other people can share it. And it feels like, to me, that there's like a, I don't know. And it's like I maybe have I don't know, like an obsessive nature or like a single-minded quality where I'm like, okay, this is important. Everybody needs to hear about this. So just like, I'm going to make it one way or another, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's interesting that you mentioned that, because the role of belief and obsession is crucial to telling any kind of story. Like if you're not obsessed with it, then it's, especially in this very busy world that we live in, it's hard to get anyone else to obsess about it enough to spend, 45 minutes with your radio documentary or an hour and a half with your album or your, 3 days with your novel or with your, with your book project or your photography. Like it's hard to get to, you're fighting for people's attention, and that brings me to this question that is in the chat that I think is a really important one, which is the role of narrative in social change, and particularly in this moment where we are fighting for people's attention. I want to know to how much does that guide the kinds of stories you tell, or is it a secondary concern to the kind of just the magic, almost childlike wonder of like, ooh, a cool story. Latif, I think I know the answer for you just by the way you were smiling, but maybe you'll surprise me.
No, I mean, I think it's mostly the ooh, a shiny thing over there. Let me chase that thing.
Yeah.
That's mostly my MO. But I do think that social change is part of that. I mean, I think to me, like part of it, and it has been sort of said in this actually surprisingly really great chat. People are offering really smart things, but like this idea of that so much of it is about sort of imagination and imagining the world being a different place than it is, or
Yeah.
imagining what could be a different way that we could all be here together. And to me, I think that like I do find that like there's a kind of a frisson of like excitement and surprise and delight that you can get from, wait, it doesn't have to be that way. There could be another. And I think stories are a way of imagining. Stories are a way of doing that. And so to me, it is just chase the shiny thing. But sometimes, a lot of the times, the shiny thing actually does kind of contain within it a kind of a vision of how this world could be a more equal, more responsible place.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Rita, how about you? The shiny thing or the important thing?
The shiny thing, and I mean, I think it's a mix, but the shiny thing, that's what starts it. But like Kearney said, about what it takes to imagine someone like her being in a classroom teaching. I think that's what literature does. At least that's what I think it did for me. When I started learning that these writers that I loved were queer like me, this changed my whole, the way I saw my life and the way I could imagine a future for myself as someone who could have a partner or, write a book. So I think literature, storytelling in general, it helps us imagine those places where people like me, a queer woman from the Caribbean, multiracial, lower middle class, can write a book one day that people will want to read. So I think there's a power there.
Yeah, absolutely. Courtney?
I think every artist chases the shiny thing. You can't help it.
Yeah.
It's what makes you different. But
Yeah.
I do think that many of the concerns, I don't think artists, we live in the world. You know, we're not off in some rarefied space, you know, just making your work and separated from the concerns that other people are worried about. Like, we live in material bodies. Like, I'm making artwork, but I walk down the street as like a Black woman, you know, like dealing with all the realities of that entails, right? And so I think like the things that are important to us are also important to a lot of other people, you know, but maybe they, because of all kinds of material realities that they have to navigate, they may not necessarily have the resources or the privilege or the tools to tell those stories in the way that you do. So, you know, for me, I think about the work, it's something that feeds me. I do it because it feeds me and it nourishes me in a particular way, and I need to do it. And I would do it if nobody ever looked at this stuff, because I just got to do it. But I also know that there are many people who, you know, experience the work and it's freeing for them. It touches something in them that they don't always have language for. And so for me, the work that I do as an artist is very much about, I do see it as an act of service, you know, service to society, service to my ancestors, and yeah, service to me too, because I need that.
Yeah. I want to, in just a few minutes we have left, I want to end with one specific question for the three of you. I feel like all these things looming ahead of us feel so overwhelming that we all need joy. And so I want just to ask you, just almost as in the spirit of what you just said, Courtney, in the spirit of a public service for the people who are watching, if you could just spend a moment and think about one thing now, not something that you've made, but that you're consuming out in the world, a piece of art, something you've read that is giving you joy. Whoever wants to go first can go first, and I think we'll end with that question. Just end things on a positive note.
I'll go.
Go, please.
Rita, I will confess that I read Tentacle in one night. It brought me a lot of joy. Like, I went, my partner drew me a bath. I just like read it. Like, I was in there like at 4 o'clock in the morning, cold and wrinkly. It brought me a lot of joy. I thought it was a fantastic book.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah.
I can do one unless Rita,
yeah,
you want to do one? Okay. For me, actually, there's a thing that I sort of that I kind of happened upon. It's not a specific thing. It's more like a category of thing, which is so one thing that I love to do sort of pre-pandemic is I would go to a lot of talks, like book talks or you know, panels like this one, or like I just love going to talks, like you know, endowed lectures and all those kinds of things. I'm crazy for that. But then when the pandemic happened, it all stopped, right? But it didn't stop. And so actually what I learned about halfway through is I go onto the website I use, but you could do, there's a million, Eventbrite. And I just literally I search the word lecture and I click the box that says free. And there is just like, there are just a million lectures. And the amazing thing is that they're from all different time zones. And so you can literally any time of the day or night, you could find all kinds of lectures about all kinds of random things on Zoom. And you could you're like muted and you could be doing the dishes, you could be doing whatever. And I just like listen to random talks about random things all the time. And it's like, I don't know, it's given me this sort of spring in my step. Like if I don't have that kind of new, that like fresh stream of like random weird stuff, it just makes me super depressed. And then once I realized this little hack, I was like, oh wow, this is great. I'm gonna do it all the time.
Great, that's wonderful. Rita, then we'll end with you.
Rum and Cokes, basically.
Rum and Coke. That'll do it.
I'm walking a lot. I started walking when the pandemic started, just going to the lonely streets of San Juan and watching the landscape and understanding. I've always loved to walk the city, but going to the places that are becoming like more empty and seeing little by little like how they deplete themselves even more. I mean, it's not a very traditionally fun thing to do. It's more of a research project, but yeah, it's a little sad too, but it's something that it it feeds me, I guess, and makes me
Great.
feel good.
Well, what's given me joy is this conversation with the three of you. Thank you so much, Latif, Rita, and Courtney. I have immense admiration for all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, everyone who stayed to watch, and everyone be well.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.